президенту. То есть, по сути дела, я думаю, минимум смыслов, которые действительно очень важен и актуален сейчас, особенно для тех людей, которые или принимают активное участие в нашей жизни, или собираются, готовятся, как молодежь наша, принять это участие. Это абсолютно необходимый минимум. Мы живем в очень интересное время, и сейчас, в переломный момент, прямо вот сейчас, буквально в эти месяцы, может быть, даже связано с трагедией вторжения врага в Курск на нашу территорию, сейчас мы начинаем понимать, что у нас были ложные смыслы в нашем обществе. Мы сегодня сейчас об этом поговорим. Но до самого последнего времени у нас были радикально ложные смыслы. Казалось, что их нет, но они были. Это были как бы антисмыслы, антиценности, которые работали над нашим обществом, над нашим государством, над нашим образованием, над нашей культурой, над нашей молодежью. И какое-то время назад мы приняли решение с этими ложными лжесмыслами бороться. И мы действительно от них территорию очистили. То есть территория смыслов сейчас представляет собой более-менее разобранную свалку, но это пустое место. То есть сейчас, только сейчас по-настоящему лжесмыслы после их ликвидации и сноса начинают заполняться настоящими смыслами. Потому что настоящий смысл – это нечто другое. Недостаточно убрать ложь, чтобы получить истину. Необходимо убрать ложь, чтобы получить истину, но недостаточно. Должно быть еще одно усилие, еще один сложный заход, чтобы на этом месте такой волонтерской пустоты образовалась система нашего нового державного патриотического мировоззрения, о котором говорит наш президент. Вот это новое мировоззрение, это уже мировоззрение ваших поколений. Старые поколения отходят, отживают, многие из них будут унесены таким грязным направлением реки истории, называемой 90-ми годами эпохой либерализма. Это уходит, и приходит новая эпоха патриотизма, русской идеи, социальной справедливости, возрождения нашего достоинства. Россия опять заявляет о себе как великая мировая держава, и это смыслы, это положительная повестка дня. Недостаточно освободиться от либерализма, чтобы сразу попасть в правильном направлении. Нужно сделать еще одно фундаментальное создательное усилие, и оно не такое простое. Это не значит просто вернуться к старым ценностям, это значит создать новые ценности. Потому что старые ценности, если они рухнули, значит, это была какая-то причина. Об этом, обо всем мы сегодня с вами постараемся поговорить. Но еще раз повторяю, что эта книжка ответит на большинство вопросов, довольно серьезных, которые стоят сейчас перед любым думающим человеком. Итак, меня попросили мои уважаемые коллеги, организаторы этого форума, поговорить с вами о новом колониализме. То есть о том, что такое гегемония, с чем мы боремся на специальной военной операции, каков портрет, каков идеологический срез того врага, который обстреливает нас, убивает наших детей, наших братьев, который вторгается на наши территории, захватывает наши земли, и с которым мы сейчас находимся в кровавом противостоянии. Что такое образ врага, против которого борется наша...
Fighting against right now. What is the image of our Russian enemy, or of the new civilization that is trying to isolate us and to separate us ethnically, in terms of religion, and they want to take us away from the West through sanctions and from the humanity in general. And this is what we're going to discuss with you, and how we can build a new unity. That's actually the topic of our forum. So there are two representations of the civilization, and if it was a lecture, I would say please write it down, because you need to know it. And I believe that it will be very relevant to you during your life. That's a very important notion that you need to know. There are two definitions of civilization. uh, civilization can be singular, and we can see it as a sequence of different historical formations, starting from ancient times, barbarians, and civilizations. So back in the days, people believed it was like that. Uh, it was promoted by ideologists of neoliberalism, colonialism, and Nazism. They divide people into several levels. So the first one is wilderness or savagery, next barbarianness, and then civilization. So before National Socialism was defeated, these terms went along with ethnical things, like wild people were considered black people, barbarians were considered white, yellow people, and only white people were considered as civilized. And it was like a racism. And Rudyard Kipling, he was a racist in fact, and he called it a burden of a white person. And the burden of a white person is a task or an objective of the Western civilization uh, to exploit, to suppress, and to not to develop everyone who is not white. To fight against barbarians who are yellow, and Russia was also considered a barbarian country. And we could see it from different pictures, and now we see that the same pictures are being published right now. They're very similar to caricatures of the 19th century. They're very similar to ideology fight. So nothing changes. We are barbarians for them. And as it comes to wild or savage people, these are people that must be used and that can be exploited, and these are colonies. And this racism was there up to the middle of the 20th century, and we can see it even today in terms of technologies when we just divide countries like the rich north and poor south. It's the same racist concept, but it's not black, yellow, and white. We have developed countries, civilized countries, we have BRICS countries, and we have weak countries that cannot be helped, like Africa, Oceania, and Latin America countries who are lagging behind. The same racial model when it comes to understanding the civilization. And at this moment, we can see that the global colonialism ideology is built on such things. It can be racial colonialism, like in the 19th century. Herbert Spencer, he was a theorist. He created the ideology of social Darwinism, and he said that community is the battlefield of species who are striving to survive. And white people were the best, the white race was the most successful in his view, and that's why it survived, and that's why in this social Darwinism the white race can suppress other countries for the sake of civilization. Because white people built civilization and black and young people didn't do this, that's why white people can oppress the others. And if you put obstacles in front of them, you are the enemy of civilization. If we're talking about racial features and technologies, this is what we see right now. There are progressive civilized countries who have single-sex marriages, who have artificial intelligence. Migration is not a problem for them. Illegal immigration is no longer a problem for them. Open borders and things like that. So they kind of have progress, and they think this is civilization, and they call it civilization. The other things are barbarity or wilderness. So if we're not talking about racial features, we see that it's a kind of traditional racial colonial context that we have West as a matrix, as an example of a civilization of humanity. There are those who challenge the West, and there are those who can be just neglected. We can just exploit them, move all toxic enterprises. You can steal something from them, and they will not be able to react. So the colonialism started with geographical discoveries. It was a Christian civilization, and they destroyed, they killed millions of people just because they were not developed enough, not civilized enough. And even the Pope had to say that Indians in the Latin America should be considered as humans, because colonialists faced new forms of culture in Central and South America. They were so shocked that those people were so different, and they asked the Pope, are these actually humans? Do they have soul? And the Pope was forced to say yes, they are not developed, they are lagging behind, but still they are humans. And conquerors, they were not sure about that. And in North America, Anglo-Saxons, they didn't have any doubts. They considered native population as slaves, and they could just destroy them. And all this was made in the name of civilization, in singular form. So when we say civilization, we should be um, very careful, because this racial colonial aspect can be inside of this notion. Because if we agree with that, we, as our country, as our culture, our history, our state, our traditional values, will be not developed enough, reckless. We will be an obstacle. We will be like a joke. It will be like a retrograde, retarded province that wants to catch up a train but fails to do that. And it is very dangerous to have this notion civilization, because it's being used to define the old colonialism. And this is one notion of colonialism. And here is the hint. In that case, we use civilization in a singular form. Civilization is another definition of civilization that has a different sense and a different structure. Now, let's shift. So first, civilization is how it's being considered in the West. And apart from that, and this is how they built their hegemony policy, and they can justify it. And when we neglect, when we're not critical about retrograded and not developed economical development, cultural development as a feature of a people or of a culture, we get trapped. We get trapped by this racist logic. So this is one notion, one definition. There is another concept which is absolutely different, and it starts with the fact that civilizations can be in plural form, that there are several civilizations, not just one. And when we acknowledge that there are other civilizations, not just one, in that case, the whole picture of the world and all justification of colonialism, imperialism, or hegemony changes instantly. So, and what's the conclusion out of this? The brightest example is Nikolai Danilevsky, a Russian scientist who wrote a great book, Russia and Europe, and he was speaking about different cultural and historical types. So these are different types. They could be ancient or modern, they can be Western or they can be non-Western, they can be built on a linear concept of time or concept of progress, like in the Western paradigm, or they can be built on the cyclic um, concept, like in Hinduism or Buddhism, or some people believe that time goes not from bottom to top, but from top to bottom. So different types, different times. Then Spengler decided to follow up on that topic, and he said that Western civilization is not the only one, and it is degrading. So what Western countries believe as progress, it's actually the feature of their soulful degradation. They pay for the progress with their souls, with their values.
Because, well, in one sense, this is the movement technically to the top, but in other meanings, this is the movement down. And this is actually the decline of Europe. And if this is not changed, if this track is not changed, then there will be nothing. Actually, they didn't see the opening ceremony of the Olympics in 2024. There weren't any requests to legalize pedophilia, which is now promoted by Kamala Harris, the candidate for the presidential chair in the US. But at that time, Spengler already envisioned that if this track is not changed, then this will be decline. Arnold Toynbee, another scientist coming from the UK, and after Danilevsky and after Spengler, he also said that we cannot just live within this linear logic like civilization, barbarians, etc. There were a lot of different civilizations that already had the sewage and water supply, etc. Like in India, Mohenjo-daro existed very, very long time ago, and they developed themselves very, very well. And aqueducts, the Roman aqueducts, these water pipes already exist. Now we take a look at them and we don't understand how it was possible during those times. Then the Egyptian pyramids are also there, right? It's also the progress. And well, Toynbee actually developed this civilizational approach, which is about the multiple civilizations. And the peak is Samuel Huntington, the American political scientist. He wrote a very good book, which is called Clash of Civilizations. Civilizations, it's a multiple form, right? Everybody is paying attention to the word clash, but actually you need to pay the attention to the multiple form. Civilizations, not one civilization. It's about the S letter at the very end. And in this S, we can find everything that we're looking for. Now we understand that if there is no single civilization without S, which works within the line from barbarians and wildlife to civilization, and civilization is the pinnacle of everything, and it's the West. The West is not only the example, but also the main beneficiary of all the development, if we use the term civilization without S. This is one approach, but once somebody says civilizations, if we add this S letter as a plural form, that's where everybody and everything is starting, because then all the foundations for the more developed to rule the less developed are ungrounded. You can't just justify the colonization, slavery, fight against whoever by saying that this culture is underdeveloped. The argument of somebody being a barbarian, of somebody being a wild person, does not work anymore. If you come from the West and if you come to other places and if you see non-Western civilization, you don't want to modernize this society or community and train these people in the system of anti-traditional values as the form of social progress. So this colonial modernization loses its point, its meaning. We are here at the territory of the meaning, and the modernizing of everything is the Western ideology. Once we admit that there are different civilizations, what civilizations exactly? For example, the Chinese civilization. It has existed for thousands of years, and one can say, yeah, but they did have any technical achievements. It's not true, because who created the gunpowder? Were those Portuguese? No, not true. The gunpowder was developed in China, and it was used for fireworks. Fireworks is the religious thing when the spirit of Yan was uniting with the yin, the female entity, and it was a religious ritual that has existed in China for thousands of years. Nobody used the gunpowder for killing of other people. What about the fleet? It was also developed in the 16th century in China, and they created an amazing fleet, and then this was used by Europe for the territorial expansion. And at some point of time, it was noticed that and observed that the marine soldiers, those who spent a lot of time in the sea, or seamen, they decaying morally. And this amazing fleet with great ships in the shape of dragons, with great sails, with genius seamen from China, it was just burnt to zero. And Americans say, well, those are idiots because of what they did. And this is actually a classical example of globalist mindset. The Americans say, well, you know, they're idiots because they burnt it totally, and if they hadn't done this, then they'd be ruling the world. And if they hadn't used the gunpowder for fireworks only and not for killing, then they'd be ruling the world again. And they say, well, we are not like Chinese. We can take advantage, real advantage of all the discoveries. We are white people and they're yellow people. They've achieved the progress, but then they moved away from this because the Chinese emperors believed that progress is evil, it's danger. This is moving in the wrong direction. We can use the technological progress, but we should also enforce our spirit. But a white person cannot understand it, and a white person believes that it was just a poor judgment. And if we talk about culture in India, well, just remember the culture there before the America that was discovered by Columbus. Just remember what buildings were constructed at that time. Now nobody can believe that those gigantic blocks can somehow transport it. But these civilizations can choose their way, either to proceed with the technical development, or they can proceed with the absence of technical development. And when it became clear to the supporters of the civilization's approach, they started to think whether we are really right in the West, whether it's right to move to a single goal, whether it's right to impose our own values, to colonize everybody, to make everybody our colonies. Is that right? And actually in the West, from the right and from the left, we saw the emergence of two interesting movements. and one of them was supported by Emil Durkheim, the anthropologist, like Franz Boas, and many others. They said, we, American and European scholars, do not have the right to say anything about other tribes, other nations, without living with them for many years, without learning their languages. We don't understand their rituals. That's why we can't say anything. And then Marcel Mauss, the nephew of Emile Durkheim, they discovered a very interesting concept. Georges Bataille has a very interesting book which is called The Cursed Part. What is the main idea? The main idea is as follows. The anthropologists, those who were studying some tribes, indigenous people, they discovered that in many tribes, in different parts of this world, there was a curse. A curse on usury, on something that is surplus, basically. So surplus is something that we get when there is a very good yield. So during this year, we have more harvest than during a regular year. And if this harvest and yield is accumulated, then sooner or later, together with surplus, they'll also face a deficit. And this deficit will backlash as a spring. That's why this cursed part, this cursed surplus, should be destroyed with a ritual orgy, and it is believed in many cultures. One needs to get rid of those surplus, because if you accumulate in one place, then you lose in the other, because then will be absence of rains, the drought, and you will lose what you have. So it's about the balance, striking the balance, and it's the fundamental civilization strategy of traditional societies. So it's not that people just don't want to develop. It's not just that they can't develop, just like the West does. They are moving away from this. They're declining this. There is a director, Werner Herzog, his name is, and he has a movie that is called Where the Green Ants Are Dreaming. So it's about Australia and indigenous people there, and there was an airfield being built, and about the approach of the indigenous people to this airfield that was being built. And so it was observed that it's not about underdeveloped, primitive creatures. It's about another logic, another culture, another civilization. It's not worse. It's not just an ancient version of the Europeans. It's just another nation with another logic and another system of traditional values that is destroying any surplus. And they just don't want to move in the direction where the Western and European culture was moving to. This is the civilization. So this is the critic from the left to this civilizational approach. And from the right, we have traditionalists and conservatives. And Spengler was more of this. And they asked, why do you think that in Europe we indeed have the right bourgeois values? Is bourgeois values the progressive class? No, it's about the undermine and decline of traditions. Let's move away from that. Let's go away from this linear progress and linear understanding of progress. Let's get back to the Middle Ages. Let's become people in the Middle Ages or in the ancient Greece or Roman Empire. And so from both sides, from the right and from the left, the idea of civilization in a singular form was attacked in the West itself. And actually, Huntington in 90s, when he wrote this book, The Clash of Civilizations, he envisioned the following. Francis Fukuyama, actually, I had some arguments with him at some platforms. At the same time, he wrote his very famous book, The End of History. So we understand quite clearly. So when everything becomes a civilization, comes the end of the history. Because when there is only one European civilization, this is something that is called globalism. We have liberal democracy, market everywhere, human rights, the same ideology, no more borders, no more blocks, no more ideologies. Nobody questions capitalism, the communism system was destroyed and declined. Everything is becoming a civilization. And this is the end of the history. So this is actually the end of the clash of even different types of the Western civilization. So this is by Fukuyama. And Huntington said no. Now, when the Soviet Union fell, we will see how this so-called unified mass of globalist world, how this field of Western civilization, which is spreading itself around the planet, will see the coming to the surface of ancient continents. Those are the continents that don't only want to follow us, they are inert, or maybe they just don't want to do this, but it's about other ideas, other environments, other values and principles. Now they'll come to the surface, they will rise, and well, God forbid they'll unite, and then they will push us back. And Samuel Huntington talks about this. Civilizations cannot disappear. This is a long process. They code the society at a very deep level. When somebody thinks that people are the same, they wear the same clothes, they have same devices, it's a very shallow outlook. And now we'll see the emergence of civilizations in a plural form. And Fukuyama didn't think actually that they even existed. And so there was this argument between Fukuyama and Huntington, both American scholars and ideologists. Now we see who has won in this argument. What Huntington said. He said that we'll see the Russian Eurasian Orthodox Empire, and it will challenge us, not because they can't find their place in the Western global world, but it's because it's just different. It has different values and different principles. We have individualism, they have the council type, we have in America the technology, they have spirit, we have traditional values, and they have the family. And so there'll be the war based on the civilizational principles. And so Huntington said that there'll be a conflict based on this. And the Chinese civilization will follow, and the Indian civilization, Huntington said, will follow the Russian one. And Islamic are based on another thing. They'll say, well, my traditional values are not yours, and I'll fight you on this. And so the African civilization as well as Latin American civilization will follow in this fight. And Huntington, who was the patriot of the West, said the following: we must not make the rest angry. He has his major article, which is called The West and the Rest. And so Huntington said, let's not make the rest angry, because if they get united and if they realize their mission of building a multipolar world, if they really get united, then this will be our end. We really need to build good relations with Russia and China. We should promise something. We should lie. We should be tricky and cunning here. We should use every tool that is available to us to prevent them from uniting, because actually in the West the things are not going as well as Fukuyama thought. And when we face this multipolar world, we'll not be able to do anything with this. And actually that was the main argument in the Western elites. And some people now they say the civilizations in the plural form, those are the supporters of Huntington, and the supporters of Fukuyama, they are using the term civilization in the singular form. And so now we can even draw some conclusion to this argument as to the meaning of the term civilization. Now we can say, who won in this argument? Huntington. He saw the picture that has become our reality now. So he envisioned that civilizations will not or would not disappear. There will be no divide between oligarchs who get integrated in the world and migrants and those who are turning into just mass proletariat workers without any provenance. And this will not happen. And this would not happen in the countries that are closer to the West, such countries as Brazil, the countries in Latin America, as developed African countries, as developed Islamic countries as China, India, and of course Russia. So there'll be no division into classes like the rich and the poor. Well, it will happen, but the civilization will be stronger, will turn out to be stronger than those. And that's how the civilization states will emerge with their traditional united values. And they will build an absolutely different order, and they'll really oppose the Western colonialism. They will oppose this idea of one civilization. That was what Samuel Huntington envisioned and forecasted 30 years ago. That was before the special military operation, before Putin, before Xi Jinping. That was just one of the trends in the logic of the world history and world politics. The difference is only in one letter, whether you add S to world civilization or not. And as it was said in Russia by the old believers, they said, I am ready to sacrifice my life only for the sake of one letter. Sometimes one can correct and edit only one letter in a text, and the meaning will change completely. And the old believers in Russia said that they are ready to give their life to preserve the wording and the letters in a text. And so that's another example, actually. This one letter, S, either we say civilization or civilizations. During the special military operation, we indeed are opposing this one letter, but it changes everything. Because if we admit that there is a civilization, then we admit the right of the West for the colonialism. And we will be doing the technological progress and everything. We will allow the change of the gender, etc. This will be the only way if there is only one civilization and it's Western. And if only we learn to write civilizations in a plural form, then we'll find our own ground. We'll pose the question, what is a Russian? What is a Russian identity? What is the point? What is the meaning of our history? Because from the Western point of view, there's only one meaning. And in the 90s, we almost fell for it. Actually, we almost became the citizens of the world. And we really wanted to come to first from a village to Moscow, then from Moscow to run to the West. And this is the only way if we're talking about one civilization. And we indeed want to learn some technical skills. And then we can get back here after everything, and we can just observe the slaves here. So this is how most of the elites in many other countries are behaving. And Kamala Harris and Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the Great Britain, behaved just like this. It is this one civilization, and anti-colonial countries and their rulers. We are an anti-colonial country, and our leader is the anti-colonial leader. He believes that Russia is the civilization state. We should be united, unified. We should not allow these classes and antagonistic classes of oligarchs and the masses. We should create a new elite. We should raise a new generation. We should win in this battle with the West in Ukraine. We should welcome our heroes coming back from this sacred special military operation, and they should create a new class. And this is the task of the civilization state, which does not only follow the path and the track of the West, but we as civilization state, we have not only our language and history, we have another future, another past, another space, another opinion about the cursed path. Because actually in the West, if you are rich, that means that you are chosen by God. But actually in our ideology, in our environment, if you are rich, you are actually quite probably cursed. Read the classics, the classical literature, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy. We are always with the poor, with the good people, those people who sacrifice themselves, those who are suffering.
Русский человек не может быть.
So Russian person cannot be happy if his brother is not happy. It's not possible in Russian psychology, in Russian ethics. It's not possible in terms of classical values. And this is how actually the Western model is built. They have it vice versa. You cannot be happy if you are happy when someone if not is not happy, and it's like a reverse formation, and this is how they build value of individual career or personal growth that oppose what we believe. It is in opposition to the Russian way, and we're in fact impacted and influenced by this word civilization. So we have gadgets, we have Western approaches sometimes, and we actually need to understand why we made this 180 degrees turn, why it was made by Russian president. But we need to realize it, and it looks that in 2024 we changed this letter, and we move in an opposite direction. So now masks are off. We are in the civilized war with the West. It is being called by our president as a satanic civilization. And it's up to you to build this civilization, to build this state, to stay for the multipolar world, to review and to restore the traditional values that are written in the presidential decree, and all these values are the direct opposition of the Western values. We even have a picture of such opposition. So they can be opposite or they can have a different definition. Another very important decree that was published in May 2024 is about historic education, where it is said that the Russian people is the creator of the great state of Russia, and our unity is our greatest value, the peoples of Russia. Russia is a very diverse country, and also we have the historic heritage which forms our identity. History is not a bunch of factors, it's a sequence of meanings. Another notion, another definition that you need to remember. It's not a bunch of facts, it's a sequence of meanings. Hegel has that definition, and he talks a lot about spiritual development, and through historical education we need to understand what is our spirit, what spirit is inside us, what meanings we have. And of course, we are at the final stage where all these meanings, all these territories and sequences of meanings related to us, to our role in the history, why we oppose the West. In the big game, Russian Empire was fighting against the British Empire. Soviet Union was fighting against Western countries based on the communist ideology. Now it's absolutely different because we have Democrats, we have market, we have different political parties. So it looks like we are very similar to the West, but still we are fighting with them. So probably it's something more. It's more about our historical identity. It's all about Russian history. And now it's getting clear. And it brings me to the end of my lecture, and I'm ready to take your questions. Thank you very much, Alexander Dugin. Now, 2 questions. We will start with that gentleman. I remind you that you need to introduce yourself, your name, your region, your city, and what organization you represent. Yes, you're welcome. Hello, Daniil. I'm from Irkutsk. I am a political scientist, so that's why I would like to say special thank you for your lecture, for your talk. Sometimes it is very difficult to understand how much information and knowledge is in your mind. So I have a very short question. You mentioned that according to hunting, our civilization is against Western civilization. In your view, is there any danger that this cultural opposition will happen with the Eastern civilization, and those people who were promoting the turn of Russia to the East, were they right or not? Thank you. That's a great question. Theoretically, it is very important to say that Russian civilization or Eurasian civilization, and we have different people who live in friendship in Russia, and it is underscored in the presidential decree. So we don't say genetically Russians, we say historically Russians. So it is very different from the Western civilization, and we can track it back to several centuries that we had different forms that were changing, and when we were going far from each other, and it started with problems in the Russian Orthodox Church back in the 16th century. We became a different civilization, but we have the same roots, Christian roots, Eurasian roots, Greek roots, but we are separated, and that's it. Of course, we're very different from Chinese civilization, from Islamic civilization. We are very different, but when it comes to the conflict with the West, I don't believe that there will be a similar conflict with the East. And those people who said we needed to turn to the East, and they were correct, and I will tell you why. So we have to turn to the East, but not actually to the East, but from the West. And when we say that the Western countries are not universal, when we turn our backs to them, we will see China, Islamic countries, Africa, Indian culture, Greek and Roman culture. We will not be alone, and we will not face only one civilization. And all other civilizations, unlike Western, don't have ambitions to impose their colonial approach, because China, probably one day, it will become a new hegemony, but it will not happen tomorrow. Anyway, if we do not depend on the West, we don't need to look for a new leader. We need to protect our own cultural, our own Russian Eurasian culture. If we are strong, if we understand our self-identity, if we have good values, if we are true patriots, we will only become stronger, and maybe it will help us to start cooperating with the West. Of course, they do have plans to clash us against China, and I think that Huntington could do that. So if in the West there were people like Trump or like right-wing uh, politicians like Orban in Europe, so first they would uh, stretch their hands to us. They can come to power and they can do it one day. We need to be very careful, and I can tell you that Western power is very strong and it's very tricky that can get inside of you. As for China, as for the East and our possible problems that we can have with China, India, or Islamic world, it's the problem number 26. And there are other problems. So to generalize and to sum up, I don't think there is a problem. I think that we need to turn from the West, and we need to establish a friendship with the rest. So we shouldn't consider the West as the universal civilization. We need to turn our back to them, and we need to protect ourselves. And that's the answer to your brilliant question. Thank you very much. And now we continue. Let's give a floor to our ladies. You can come closer if you don't mind. What is your name? Where do you come from? And what do you represent? Hello, Maria Shapovalova, Moscow. I represent High School of Economics. My question is about universal approach of knowledge in social scientists or humanitarian scientists, where it's not just about figures and numbers, so it's very subjective scientists. So can we say that there is a single trajectory of the scientific knowledge and development, or scientific knowledge is being developed differently? So that's a great question. So yes, it has two parts. So first, there are humanitarian sciences. If you want to hear my answer, I am deeply convinced that all left and all rights acknowledge the diversity of knowledge, of different knowledge. So science cannot be in plural, in singular form, because there are Islamic sciences, there are Indian sciences, it can be Russian science, and we need to develop it. And as a position to conventional wisdom, it's not just about humanitarian sciences. And Bruno Latour showed us, postmodernists showed us that we are tricked, and we see that a lot of experiments is just a cheat, and most of Western sciences are based on that. So even in the area of humanitarian sciences, civilization has upper hand. Civilization tells you what exists and what does not exist. And you can also call for different anthropologists who were writing about this, and I'm pretty sure that you know these scientists. However, as for humanitarian sciences, so there are no fair explorers or scientists apart from propagandists from the West, that they depend on civilization, because the basis of humanitarian knowledge is the matrix that dominates in this civilization, and it's all about natural sciences, and it's still about humanitarian sciences, which is obvious because humanitarian sciences are based on several philosophic ideology, uh, which is the foundation. So there is no single sociology. Such sciences can be different. And we can take a look at Indian sociology or Japanese, and we will see indigenous sociologies that understand their relations with their civilization paradigm, and sociologists that would like to be universal, but in fact they are just colonial facts of Western-centric thinking. So in science there is a colonial approach as well, and Indian Prime Minister Modi said, mentioned mentioned decolonization of Indian mind. So in fact, out of humanitarian disciplines in the modern educational process, it is required to remove these universal Western-centric colonial aspects. And I know that this process is taking place very intensely in Indian educational institutions. So we see that the paradigm is being changed, and it is very different from what happened in India several years ago. So, yes, we see that humanitarian sciences are based on ideologies. And it happens with history, because you can say that you can interpret a historical fact, or you can just forge it. So there was a myth about ancient Ukrainians, and this is just ridiculous. You can make up facts like that, and we can reconstruct them. So in that regard, it's a very great power that allows us to manipulate a very big block of humanitarian disciplines. And Marxists understood this, because they believed that science was just a build-up of the economical structures. We don't have a single abstract knowledge. It's a knowledge that is being articulated by the civilization or class, as for Marxists. And this is the only true for anti-colonial regimes. For modern Russia of 2024, it's the only truth that all humanitarian disciplines are being induced by basic paradigm formations of a civilization. In 1990s, when we took up on Western paradigms, there was a different formation. And this is what Huntington and Fukuyama said. So Huntington said that all humanitarian disciplines are dependent on civilization. Fukuyama didn't agree with him. So Western civilization believes that they are the only civilization, which is not true. But we say that science is a part of civilization. But Western countries see that there is only one science, our science, but it's absolutely incorrect. So we can interpret historical facts differently. We can say who's Nazi, who's not, who's the great Ukrainian, who's not, and this is what we say. Humans are individuals, so that's why males and females are options. You can choose. You can remain a male, then turn to woman, or vice versa, because they think that it's just an option, being a male or female, but we have a different approach. And when we say that, yes, we have a different approach, they say And no, you're just retarded. It's like a fascism. Why are you having males and females, families, traditional values? They say that, um, like, go on and say that there is God. They believe there is no God. And that's basically it as far as your brilliant question is concerned. So we have just 5 minutes more. If you don't mind, just a couple of questions more.
В белом.
So a young man in the white shirt will be the first one. Then the man in the gray hoodie. Could you please come down so that we could pass you the mic? Hello, my name is Alexander Kondratyev. I represent Astrakhan State University, named after Tatishev. I study international relations, and my question is about the politics and culture. So you said that there is a continuous dispute between Paddington and Fukuyama. And you also said that one should not make the rest angry. And that's the ideology in the West. So, talking about the East, the geopolitical civilizations. This is a conflict between the Chinese civilization with the Western one. Well, actually, in the East, Buddhism is quite a common religion, but actually in Korea, the Anglo-Saxon Protestantism is imposed, and now a lot of values in Korea and Japan were destroyed. And the conflict between China and the Republic of Korea or Japan, this is not a conflict between China and the Eastern civilization, but it's a conflict between an Eastern civilization, which is China, and the satellites from the West. And actually, it could have turned differently. And Japan and the Republic of Korea were not always been like this, but actually, the South Korea to get back to its eastern roots, it should reunite with the northern North Korea, and they should get back to the Confucius ideology, Chuche, and other ideologies. So this is the truly Korean one, and Huntington reserved a place of a separate civilization for Japan, and well, Japan actually does have the potential to become one, but not now. Now it's just a puppet of the West. And as to Ukraine, well, for the past 100 years, the West was working on making Ukrainians believe that they are not part of our people, of our nation. Actually, they did have the periods of separate history, at least in the western Ukraine. For some period of time, they were part of Poland and Austria, etc. And they did have some form of historical identity, but not all the time and not among everybody. Actually, even in the Western Ukraine, there was an Orthodox identity. So what we are facing now is an absolutely new thing. It's a ungrounded identity. So maybe they had some grounds not to like us that much, and it all started long time ago. When was the fight for Kiev between the rulers in Vladimir and Galetska-Volynsk? So there were some disputes at that time, and there were different periods in our history when we indeed followed different paths. So they do have some grounds to believe that they're different, but what form of different, right? Now, their identity is the racist, aggressive, absolutely artificial one. So it's just unsubstantiated at all. And this is the fall absolute fall, and I don't think that you can really deroot a nation, because actually half of the people in Ukraine is normal. Of course, they are influenced by propaganda and the totalitarian regime now, but when we win in Ukraine, actually we have no choice. Otherwise, we will just not exist. No peace, no stop. This is not an option. We should win in Ukraine, and I believe and I hope and I would really like to get some part of our people back to normalcy. We just need to indeed put this Western Russian identity in some normal format. Take a look at Belarus. In Belarus, they also have their own identity. They also had some periods in their history during the times of the Lithuanian rule, and they do differ from us. But this pseudo identity that is now imposed is an extremity, and well, I think that we can definitely overcome this. We managed with the Chechen nation. We also fought with them, but now they're our brothers, our heroes. Now we are waging this sacred war with them, shoulder to shoulder. If we said something like this during the first Chechen war or the second campaign, I don't think that anybody would believe it. And I really hope and I do believe that, well, we will never be symmetric, right? We should always remember and believe that they are still our brothers. Yes, they are brothers who went crazy. They are caught by the evil spirit, but they're still our brothers. Because otherwise, we just give a part of our soul to our enemy. Thank you. And last question. Could you please pass the mic to our volunteer? Right. Hello. Could you please introduce yourself? Republic of Czechia, Konstantin. I represent the delegation of Liberal Democratic Party. So my question is, all civilizations are based on differences. There are different points of influence, and the president of Russia approved the concept of foreign policy, and civilization states are also described there. But for our foreign guests who've come here, could you explain what Russia can suggest? What is the ideology and the ideological ground and platform that Russia can suggest? You already mentioned right and left. There is no first world, there is no second world. Let's say on some time. We got your question. Thank you. Very, very good question and an important one. Indeed, if now we talk to our international guests, they might get a false idea that Russia wants to replace the West, to replace the liberal ideology with its own ideology, like Russian one or anything else. But that's not true, because multipolar world, this is not the return to bipolar world. We are not competing with the West. We are not as powerful as somebody thinks. Even when we win in Ukraine, we will not be able to become the hegemony. We don't have enough resources, and actually we don't have the idea that we can suggest to humanity. And however, what we can suggest to other civilization states, I mean the people in Africa, in Asia, Latin America, in India, in Japan, and even to the people in the West, we can suggest and come up with this S civilizations in a plural form. We can ask you, people in Africa, what mindset are you pursuing and following? You have the mindset that you got from people who actually made you slaves, who colonialized you, but you continue to study their science, their narratives, etc. It's time to get back to your own identity. I have a very good friend, Kimi Siba. He's now become an advisor of the head of Niger. And he says that Africa is the world that was in the beginning and will be in the end. African civilization is the civilization of the new golden age. But for this, African people should get back to their roots, not get to the Russian roots, but get back to their own African roots. And here, Russia can only suggest to help the people in Africa to follow their own African way. It's not to replace one colonizer with another one. It's not to exploit the people in Africa as the Western colonizers are doing this. Right, the opposite. This is to liberate people in Africa for the sake of their own African freedom. And the African people have to fill this in with their own values. The same can be said about China. Obviously, we cannot impose any Russian values on China. We want to have independent and see independent Chinese China, and will help to build this civilization, even though our civilization is different. The same goes for Islam. We don't want to turn Islamic states into orthodox ones. We want to make the Islamic world the independent player in the international arena. So Islamic identity is the task for the Muslims to pursue. And the Russian mission is to help the process of the decolonization of other nations. They should see themselves not only as civilizations, but as civilization states. They should form some blocks and spaces. And together, we need to build a just multipolar world. And the West, the true West, not the contemporary postmodernism, West can be our ally in this. And the art of politics is to turn enemies into allies. And, well, we do not share anything in common with globalists, because here we have absolutely different mindset. But with other representatives of Western society, we do have some common ground. And actually, quite soon, they can become our allies. Actually, Trump is Huntington. There was already an example, and we've seen it. It's possible. That means that it's possible. And there is an alternative to the West. And Orban is now temporarily leading the EU. Well, it's a symbolic role, but still, he is a person with such a mindset and outlook in the world that together with him, we can build our friendship and build our connections. Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexander Dugin, here in the territory of meanings. Thank you. Dear friends, we are closing our key session. Thank you very much for the discussion and for the questions. Before we leave,